we take words from lots of other older languages and put them into our own, and that's why, like, sometimes we just have a terrible moment trying to figure out grammar and all that sort of a thing. All it is to say is that, Bible is not an English word. It's a Greek word. Biblios means book. And usually, in Greek, ho is the definitive article. So you say, ho biblios, this is the book. And just to kind of clarify exactly what we're talking about when we speak of the Bible, because we can be sort of mysterious and say, well, this is the Bible. No, it is the book. It is a collection of books that in its entirety then becomes not just any book, but the book that drives us for how to understand who we are and how God interacts with our lives. Ultimately, I think if you're going to understand the Bible, you have to be able, I think in one sentence, to be able to say what you think the Bible means. Why does the Bible exist? What impact does it have on your life? For me, I answer that in the sense of that it is the book of God's relationship with his people. No more, no less. That's really what it is intended to be. It is the reporting of that journey and the assistance for those of us who come later to be able to have that 20/20 hindsight, and hopefully we don't make as many mistakes as our predecessors. But that's the thing. So Genesis, well, that isn't an English word either. That's a Hebrew word, and that word is beginning. So you have the book, and the very first book in that the book collection is beginning. This is where God lets us know what he really was about. This is God's intentions. This is God's hopes for what would happen. And so you might know the story about how it gets spoken of as 6 days, and it begins with kind of the basics things, the stars and the moons and all this kind of stuff. And then it builds on that until you get birds and animals and things of that nature, particularly on the 5th day. And then on the 6th day is humans. Now, those first 5 days, God reports those as being good. Creation is good. But it's different when you come to the 6th day. On the 6th day, with humans being created, that is very good. This is the point. Why does God do this? I call it the human experiment, because it's all about the climax of this creation, which is humans. Now, what's the context? At least, we're talking about eternal matters here, and so it'll get a little wishy-washy, but God had all sorts of other heavenly beings, particularly if you read the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible. You got cherubim and seraphim and all these different kinds of creatures that just make us kind of go, whoa, okay. And you also have that story that gets rather sad. It's just kind of gently alluded to that basically a third of the angels reject God. And again, when you're looking towards the end of the Bible in 1 John, it most clearly, as ever in the Bible, will say who God is. God says he is love. And so understand that this is who God is. We have all sorts of images for God, but just replace all that and think of God as love. And what would that be like when basically a third of the heavenly creatures reject you, reject love, and choose another path? So in a sense, God's heart was broken. He says, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to do this heavenly type of human experience, experiment, and make a new type of creation that will love me, that will be able to be in relationship with that kind of love. We are created in God's image, right? Nothing else in creation is. And what exactly that means, well, we don't really know. There are kind of bits and pieces for what we can think and talk about, what that is. But it doesn't really mean that we look like God. That is obvious. It isn't a physical image. But this is a part of it, and really we're going to learn or notice one piece from Noah as to what it is to be created in the image of God. But us humans, we're a strange sort. We just are never satisfied. We aren't satisfied with paradise. We aren't satisfied with being created in the image of God. We go, well, okay, that's really awesome, God. Happy to hear that we're created in your image, whatever exactly you mean by that. But that must mean that there's something left out. How is it that we're not quite God? What is that little piece? And I submit to you, that's what drives us and always has. Our disobedience to God is always found somehow in that little itty bitty piece that separates us as children of God from being God. And we're not satisfied that we don't have that we don't really know that we can't live in such a way that is erased. So you have 4 sin stories. In Hebrew tradition, with like the Passover, you would have the youngest child that would come to the oldest adult and say, basically, why is the world a mess? Why do mommies and daddies get divorced? Why do I hate my brother or sister? Why are there calamities, earthquakes, and all sorts of acts of God that destroy things? And how are we different from God? Why can't we be God? Those are the questions. Well, okay. So these are the answers. They're like archetypal answers. Sometimes people reference the story of Adam and Eve as that of being disobedience to God, and certainly it is, but I don't think that that's really the issue. Every sin is disobedience to God. The issue here is between Adam and Eve, because the infamous snake, who at that point can walk and talk, representing evil, didn't just come up to Adam and Eve together and say, hey, you know that piece that's really bugging you, that is separating you from being God? Absolutely. And there's that one little place that God says you're supposed to steer clear of, right? Yeah, that tree. And so, that's how you get to be God. That's how you erase it. But evil separates them and comes to Eve first. And Eve says, okay, I'll try it. And then Eve says, Adam, you should try it. Why does Eve do that? Because Eve wasn't all of a sudden like made perfect. She didn't become God. Unfortunately, she now knows what God knows, and that's in some ways that part that's different. But humans can't handle that. And so what do we do when there are things that we can't handle, when we find ourselves in a place where now we're run amok? Well, we have to blame someone. That's what humans always do. So, God shows up and goes, hey, something's wrong here. You've been to the tree, haven't you? And what does Eve do? Eve says, well, the serpent made me do it. And Adam goes, Eve made me do it. And you have now this separation between Adam and Eve. That which should have been the most splendid of relationships is injured. That's sin 1. Sin 2 is they have their first 2 children are Cain and Abel. And you would think, we all have families. And boy, do we have families. Some are a little more bumpy than others. But all have some sort of bumpiness. And even sometimes within those relationships that should be the closest, either literal brother and sister or figurative in a way that we should get along with our fellow kind of people, and we don't. And what is that? And jealousy can step in. We have the story of Cain and Abel. It was as simple and as significant as Cain thought that God loved Abel more. So he kills him. The third sin story is an odd and uncomfortable one. It's interesting. People are all over the map theologically with how to explain it. Some try to make it into a human kind of thing. No one knows, but I happen to not be of that mind. That it talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men. And for me, it is an issue of the heavenlies. It is of the universe. And it is in that sense that says, why is it that just like everything seems out of whack, that we can't even put our finger on, we can't begin to touch it? The world is out of control, and you know, again, earthquakes and all those kinds of things. What is up with that? And so for me, this gets back to that ever-present question of what separates me from God, from being God, and how can I close that gap and actually be God? And in this sense, all right, God doesn't want to seem to tell me. He puts me in paradise, and he puts up a tree and says, well, that's the difference, and then he won't let me eat from it. But I bet there are other heavenly beings that know what the difference is here. I mean, that little walking, talking snake thing certainly seemed to know. Maybe I'll talk to some of his friends. And one way or another, that's the deal. I mean, supposedly it gets into sexuality, and it's just really uncomfortable. That then the children are born and they become giants and all sorts of things. It's really an odd story. But for me, it's that sense that we can partner with evil, and we need to recognize that. And when we do, it's disastrous. The fourth sin is the so-called Tower of Babel. In the good old days, and it's fascinating that we still talk like this, that God is up for some reason. Like, you know, he's just, you know, even I remember in the days when we started doing astronauts and things like that, they go, did you find God up there? I go, I really don't think that God's just like hanging behind the moon or something. Okay. So, but that was really what they understood. God was up. And the sky is blue because that's water's up there, and God opens up a little gate, and then the waters come down, and they call that rain. That was their worldview. Okay. And so God was just up there somehow. And it really doesn't seem that far. So if we could just build a building that would get us up there, then I can close that gap. I can walk and talk and be God. Those are the four sins. And one way or another, all of our little sins reside within something that has to do with those. So what are you going to do if you're God? The human experiment is failing. Well, you start all over. We know these kinds of things. Wipe the slate clean, right? That's what God does. He says, all right, I'm going to wipe everything out. Noah, you get to be the one who will become the father of a new day. Why Noah? You always have to ask these things with the Bible, with these stories. Why Noah? Well, it says because he's blameless. Well, so he was perfect, right? No. There aren't very many people in the Bible who get designated as blameless. Some like King David and Job. You know, Job, everything bad happens to him. So you may not really want to be designated by God as blameless because your life often is especially bumpy. Okay. So Noah is. But there's going to come a day here when Noah gets so drunk that he's laying naked, passed out on the ground. Is this your image for what the future of humanity is going to look like? That really doesn't seem to be the issue. The Bible really doesn't worry about that. In fact, the problem is how his son Ham reacts. Because Ham is the one who discovers Dad naked on the floor. He thinks it's hilarious. He goes, tells his brothers, Dad's naked and all drunk and passed out on the floor. Particularly when you talk about Middle Eastern philosophies and understanding of justice, this is a bad deal. And so, to this day, in a sense, the descendants of Ham are still cursed. And that's why, when you go on a little bit further the road here, and get to when the Hebrew people grab a hold of the promised land, they understand themselves to be the chosen people, right? This is all of their cousins. You always have to recognize in the Middle East, everybody's related. But they hate each other because they don't believe that the other one is the right lineage for following God. So when it comes that the people that had been off languishing in slavery for 400 years, when they get to the promised land, Moses and all of that, they feel that it is legitimate. It is, in fact, their mandate to do everything to basically obliterate and kick out the people that are currently in the promised land, because those are the Canaanites. They are the descendants of Ham. They have no right to be in the promised land. So understand always when you're talking about biblical stories, especially from that Middle Eastern perspective, they hold on to these slights forever. And so it will be. So at the very start of the Bible, we understand that it isn't about people not doing stupid things. Noah does some stupid things. But it is about having the heart of God. That's what it always is. That's what it is to be blameless. And in a sense, you can say that that's what it is to be in the image of God. To have God's heart. And that's a pretty cool thing. And something that we can be satisfied with, because that's more than enough. So God sends a flood, says, phooey, going to start over. And you have the whole rainbow thing, and you know that's supposed to be God's covenant. And I'm sure this is just one of my sort of strange pet peeves, but I'm not 100% happy when I read about, well, the rainbow is this great promise, my covenant, that I'm never going to again kill everyone on the planet with a flood. Well, that still leaves at least an open door for killing a whole bunch of people with a flood, and it keeps open the options for killing everybody in any other measure. But that's how my mind works. Thankfully, God has not seen fit and has taken a very different approach down the road. Because this phase of the experiment isn't going to work either. But he gives it a go. So, you get to be Noah. And remember that, I mean, this is now years. And you're going to have these moments when you're going to wonder if you're crazy even yourself. Think what that was like. How did your wife react? How did the neighbors react? There have been all sorts of movies, of course, that have been made, and they show the disdain and taunting that happens from the people around Noah. And so you're this guy that all you have is this sense of God's heart leading you to build a boat because the floods are coming. Really? And so that's tunnel with no light number one. I'm sure there are a lot of nights when Noah finally goes to bed and he says, God, am I really hearing you right? Or am I just all confused? You know? I mean, I understand, there's Adam and Eve, and they listen to the wrong voices. Am I listening to the right one? And his heart always told him yes. So he kept going on because he was certain that God was present and that God would see him through. That's the only thing that was really present there for him. Well, the rains finally come. And I suppose you might be tempted to say, see, I'm vindicated. Well, yeah, you can do that. Told you so if you want. But now there's even a greater weight upon Noah. He has the weight of the future of humanity. How is he going to help encourage people to do better next time than the people before? That's the conundrum. And that would have been bad in and of itself. But you have his very own son, Ham, who's already shown that in the future we will still be holding on to those temptations to act poorly as we did in the past. So this is tunnel without any light number 2. I'm doing what I can, God, but I only got 3 sons and one of them's already messed up. How am I going to do this? And so think about your own places of tunnel. Are there moments, have there been moments, is there maybe even now such a moment for you when not only is it a difficult moment, but you really don't see a light at the end of the tunnel? And what else is left? There really is nothing without faith that sees you through. What are those tunnels for you? What do they look like? To be one who maintains such a heart of God is going to put you at odds. Jesus will be the final experiment that finally fixes matters. And understanding that's after God has tried a number of things and finally resigned himself to the fact that humans are humans and they're always going to try to find out what that little piece is that separates them from being God, and they're going to lust after that forever, it seems, and so they can't save themselves. So salvation has to happen through Jesus. And that's how I will maintain the love, how I will maintain my connection with people, because otherwise they separate themselves from me just like a third of the angels. And that's the story of the Bible, the story of the book. God wanting to experience and express the love that is actually his identity. God can do no other than love because God is love. And that's what God's looking for. And when his heart is broken, think what that must be like for the creator of the universe. And you go, all I want is to be in a loving relationship with you. You have paradise, essentially. And yet, somehow or another, for some strange reason, that isn't enough. So as you're moving through the days of your life, what are those tunnels? What are the arks, the boats that God is having you build? Jesus shows up most significantly with his power at the moments and places of darkness. That's where his light needs to show. But those are times then when it's very difficult for us. And as difficult as they are, a part of that hope, a part of that promise from God is that the darker it seems, the more significant that God may be acting, the more miracles that God is actually doing. And we may not know the reality of what all this adds up to be until we finally get to knock on heaven's door. But until such time, our job is to be faithful. Our job is to not be perfect, just like Noah and any of the others aren't perfect, but it is to focus on this heart of God that now we are promised is there through the waters of baptism, that God only sees the purity and the righteousness of Christ who dwells within us. That all of that messiness is gone. That God finally found a way. It took him a lot of thousands of years. But he found a way to ensure love continues. that love is expressed from him and experienced by him. That's all that really God is looking for. He wants to be in relationships of love. Everything else, comes alongside that, but isn't the essence. Everything else flows from that. And that's what we so often get confused in our culture. We really believe that we are good by our behavior. And so as long as I don't do really, really terrible things, I'm a good person, and God has to send me to heaven. And that is precisely the wrong thing. It shows up countless times in the Bible. It's about me having the heart of God. And that heart is love. It is generous, kind of cheerful love that wants to bless those around me. Because that's what love is. So when you are out building your ark, whatever that looks like, there is going to be negativity. There is going to be some sort of sense of persecution. This is the cross that Jesus is referencing when he says, take up your cross. Moments when you don't have to. You have a choice. Yes or no? But God is saying, this is where I placed you. And this is where I hope that, in a sense, you will trust me and follow me and listen to your heart that is aligned with mine and be faithful through this issue. Because it's important. And it changes eternity. If you will do that. What are those things for you? What are those eternal matters that maybe look really dark? And how do you see, from times in the past when God has been there, at the moment you didn't think you could get through it, and somehow you did, well, that somehow is God. And how can you help a culture that doesn't really see that today? A culture that really kind of thinks we're all on our own. A culture that doesn't really see God as being in there doing his stuff alongside of us. Because we don't see what it looks like. It doesn't always look like what we think it should. And so then we've just thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And it is to our own demise. So there are two pieces to take home. One, whenever there is a tunnel with no light for you, be assured, be confident, embrace, claim that God is present and God is seeing you through it. And the other piece is to know that this is something really important. Not only will God do something eternal through it, but it gives the opportunity for you to touch someone else's life and show them that when they have the tunnels of life, when they are seemingly surrounded by darkness, that God's light is there and God is seeing them through it, and that's the real promise. That, in fact, you embrace that. You don't like it, but you understand that that's where God is doing miracles. And that changes the world. Let's pray.